Hi guys, welcome back. It is Christy, also known as Mama Lee. Nice to see you again. So, as promised, I said I was going to be doing some reading of some killers. I'm a little late. I know I said I was posting around 4, but I got busy. I got doing some stuff. As most of you know, on my Facebook live streams, I play a lot of Dead by Daylight, and I never really took the time to read about the characters. I'm one of those. So I thought it would be cool for people who are busy like me and just really didn't get a chance to read about the killers that you could just listen and get to know the characters better as I tell you about their backstories. So the last videos that we've done, I think the last 3 videos that I've did were the different types of survivors. And as more survivors come out and the packages come out for killers and things like that, I will be reading more of those to you guys. So if you'll have me. Anywho, let's go over to this. Let's get into it. This is the new background. I know a lot of you are like, RPD, Raccoon City Police Department. Yes. On Dead by Daylight, they come out with different killers and survivors that sometimes are from movies that we all know and love. And this Resident Evil happened to be movies and gaming, so it just kind of flows. Fits right in. It's perfect. So, if you'll bear with me, we'll get started. Okay, let's see. We do have... let's see. I wonder where we're gonna start. I don't know. I actually run as the Legion all the time. That's actually my main person, and I love her. I think she's great. I have played as the new killer, which is Nemesis. But the Legion is, I don't know, she's the same height as the survivors, and I love playing. I guess I can't say her because it's technically them. So let's read about her character, and we'll go from the Legion. I think that would be a great place to start. All right, so the Legion's backstory. Intermediate difficulty. I think the Legion is very easy to work with. So the backstory is Frank Morrison was 19 and had little to show for it. He'd stopped attending school after being kicked out of the basketball team for shoving a referee into the stands. Yet Frank was a man of potential, who could light up a room despite his bleak childhood. At 6 years old, he'd been taken away from clergy to start a circuit of foster homes. No matter how many times he'd lashed out, threw tantrums, and got into fights, they kept moving him to new, unfamiliar houses. His last move had been 3 years prior, when his last foster dad, Clive Andrews, had picked him up from the adoption center. They'd been on the road for 7 hours before reaching a small bungalow in Ormond. It would be the longest time they'd spend together. Clive was too busy trading checks from family services for drinks at the bar. Ooh, Clive is not a very good role model already, right off the bat. Ormond was a small, stale place, a remote town of 6,000 inhabitants, where gray winters dragged on for most of the year. Frank did everything he could get into another adopted family, but he changed his mind when he caught the attention of a beautiful girl. That's normally how it is. Julie was a popular girl who was convinced that she deserved better than a life in Ormond, and Frank was an outsider. He was her ticket out. Frank attended parties she threw where everyone was younger than him and easily impressed, which he liked. He met the impulsive Joey, who liked to show off, and the shy, naive Susie, who was Julie's best friend. Too far. There we go. They would hang out in an abandoned lodge up Mount Ormond. Their time together was a perfect break from the boring conformity of their small, insignificant, everyday lives. Frank saw it was an opportunity to shape their lack of experience into something powerful. He lined up nights of, debauchery and rampage, testing their limits. Bullying, vandalism, and theft were essentially their weekend plans. It came to a point where they would do anything he asked. Nothing was off limits when they put their masks on. One evening, Frank dared Joey to vandalize a store that had recently fired him. They snuck inside easily enough, as the building was supposed to be empty after closing hours. But a cleaner who was still there grabbed Julie as soon as she came near. Hearing her stifled cries, a dark impulse took over in Frank. He rushed to her aid, knife in hand, without hesitating, planted the blade into the cleaner's back. The group stared at Frank in shock. He ordered them to finish the job. Joey clenched his jaw, grabbed a knife, and stabbed the bleeding man in the ribs. Susie didn't want to. Frank shouted at her. They had to finish what they started. Julie closed her eyes and jabbed the knife into the man's chest. She handed the wet blade to Susie. They were all in this together now. Susie stared at Julie in disbelief as Frank grabbed her trembling hands and inserted the knife deep into the man's throat. Frank told them to move fast. They mopped the blood off the floor, stashed the body in the trunk of Joey's car, and drove up Mount Ormond. All four were digging in the muddy snow to dispose of the body when Frank spotted something moving through the woods. He grabbed his knife and broke from the group to check it out. The fog thickened around Frank, becoming so dense that he soon could no longer see ahead. He retraced his steps and stumbled onto an ominous trail. He followed the eerie path as if called by the darkness. Julie, Susie, and Joey finished digging, but Frank was nowhere to be seen. Julie spotted his muddy footsteps in the snow, and the three of them followed the trail, which took them deeper into the woods. When Julie, Susie, and Joey did not return home that night, their parents thought they'd run away with Frank. Each family came up with a different theory. The mood of the town changed, however, when a body was found by an abandoned lodge up Mount Ormond. So I'm assuming that the people in the town were kind of like, uh-oh, thinking that the kids did it and took off because, murder. Let's go to the new killer. I want to read some about Nemesis. Dude is super cool, and he's really fun to play with. Intermediate character. Again, he's really not difficult to play with. It takes a little bit of back and forth to kind of get a hang of that tentacle that comes out of his hand, and that can kind of whip people with. But he's really fun, a lot of fun. I'm super excited to play on the new map. We'll see how that goes. We're all kind of still in limbo at this point. As me making this video, the new map came out, had a ton of glitches, and now they pulled the map and they're working on it. So I have yet to actually see the map myself, and I refuse to go look online because I want it to be a surprise. Most of you know I'm a huge Resident Evil fan, so I'm waiting. Anyway, character, Nemesis, backstory, we got this. Designed by the Umbrella Corporation, the Nemesis is a nearly unstoppable super soldier fixated on pursuing and eliminating its targets. Part of the Tyrant T-103 series, this specimen has increased intelligence and awareness due to the NE-A parasite implanted within it. Its first mission unleashed it upon Raccoon City, where it had a singular objective: exterminate the STARS members. Rampaging through the city, the Nemesis faced off against Jill Valentine multiple times, and though she managed to escape, he was never far behind. Nearly he had his target when a strange fog descended upon them, mixing with the smoke of the city in chaos. The phenomenon meant nothing to him. The frigid cold and decreased oxygen never posed a threat. All that mattered was the soldier on into the fog, continuing the mission, finding STARS, exterminating STARS, and kill anyone who gets in the way. So he really did soldier on into the fog. He didn't give a crap. He's like, no, I got a mission. Beep boop, gotta get it done. Alright, so we are gonna move on to the Trickster, who's also a newer killer for the Dead by Daylight series. Also a lot of fun as well. So his character info, backstory. A lot of people when the Trickster came out said he was supposed to be like the Joker, and I don't know. Maybe they derived some things from him, but I don't see it. I see his background and everything still completely different from the Joker. So I think he's his own entity. Anywho, backstory on the Trickster. Ji-Woon Hak thrived under the attention of others, energized by every eye that watched him and every tongue that spoke his name. Amidst the prestige, he had only one desire: more. Even as a child, he found ways to draw crowds. Working at his family's restaurant, he attracted businesses with spectacles as he performed using throwing knives. Gullible tourists believed he was a traditional South Korean experience, gladly parting with their money to witness it. Ji-Woon's father spent the restaurant's earnings on dancing and vocal lessons for his son, pushing him to attain the fame he never could. Ji-Woo did not disappoint. After years showcasing his abilities to new nobodies at talent shows, he hit the track to stardom. Yun Jin Lee, a producer at Mighty One Entertainment, recruited Ji-woon into her training program. He transferred to a dormitory in Seoul, where for 14 hours a day he was crafted into a star, taught how to move, how to sing, how to carry himself with the right balance of confidence and modesty. Training as the process was, it worked. Yun Jin selected Ji-woon to join the band, no spin, bringing a raw energy to their tracks. Fame was almost immediate. Ji-woon lived in a daze of interviews and admiration, and though the frenzied schedule exhausted his bandmates, he was invigorated. Each day was an affirmation that he was greater than the mediocrity society spewed out. But over time, the champagne grew stale. When he looked at his fans, he saw their joy and envy split 5 ways, thinned out between each band member. The validation that had surged through him left a desperate yearning for more. Ji-woon kept up impressions, mimicking a charm long buried under loathing. He recorded the latest no-spin album with his bandmates, never missing a beat. After a lengthy lunch break, he returned to the studio to discover fate had granted him a gift. The scent of burning wires was unmistakable. He rushed to the control room, finding the door blocked by fallen speakers. On the other side, his bandmates pounded on the door, their cries accompanied by the crackling of flames. Ji-woo called to them, dashing to the speakers, grabbing one and stopping. He froze. Each breath was a conscious, deliberate process requiring all his attention, the nearby cries hardly audible until slowly he backed away. And then he heard it. They were screaming his name as they burnt, screaming for him to save him. Ji-woon! Ji-woon! Ah! It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever heard. When the fire crew arrived, his tears were genuine. Ji-woon was celebrated as a tragic figure, a hero who did all he could in a futile attempt to save his friends. Yun Jin paraded him through interviews until it was time to rebrand. He was reborn as a trickster, a solo artist who produced his own songs, sporting a soft heart beneath a wild exterior. But away from the concert setups and television stages, something darker grew. He targeted those who lived alone, coming to them in the night. The first was a college music student with a captive voice. Ji-woon woke him with a baseball bat to the skull, binding his arms and legs, gagging him with a rag duct taped to his mouth. He tortured him for hours, dissecting him alive. Yet there was something missing. A sound, a connection. He wanted to hear the victim's wondrous voice pleading as he cut his belly open, but all he received was muffled cries through a rag. He learned and adjusted. Victims had to be abducted, driven to an abandoned building where he could let their voices carry unstrained emotion. He made music from them, prodding in the right places to evoke different types of shrieks and howls, stabbing the quadrates lumbrum elicit a long guttural wail, while slashing the carotid artery. Bleh. I don't do editing, so when I stumble over my words, that's what we get. Sorry. Stabbing the quadratus lumbrum elicit a long guttured wail, while slashing the carotid artery created a sound similar to a cat being strangled. There was honesty in their suffering. Ji-woon recorded each session, synthesizing and working them into his songs, hiding them behind layers of melodies. He was elated with his work. He lifted hints for police, arranging a mink boa from a recent photo shoot around a victim's slashed throat. For his next killing, he removed the teeth from a man that a boxer in one of his music videos was without. During a partially audacious plea for attention, he killed a fan he had met during a VIP meetup, replacing her eyes with his diamond cufflinks and writing, "I have seen God," and a blood across her chest. Each scene was a dazzling spectacle. Between music and murder, Ji-woon's work was discussed globally. However, as violence became his preferred art style, his music career took a hit. Revenue was down, and Mighty One executives pointed their fingers at him. Yun Jin, with professional fury, came to his defense, but she was outnumbered. It was decided that Ji-woon would no longer self-produce his songs. The decision was devastating. His tracks fused genuine humanity into music, yet executives rejected anything that wasn't generic and expected. And so be it. If they couldn't understand his art, he would incorporate them into it until they did. He had 3 months until he was to perform a private show for Mighty One's board members, 3 months to plan his magnum opus. He transferred obscene amounts of money to a veterinarian in exchange for canisters of nitrous oxide, then bribed the stage technicians of Mighty One's private theater for access to the room. His celebrity granted him a benefit of the doubt no regular person could conceive. When the show was ready, gas seeped into the room as executives and stagehands awaited Ji-woon, conveniently running behind schedule. When he arrived, half-conscious bodies were splayed in their seats, crawling across the floor. He worked quickly, binding everyone, pausing only when he came to Yeon-jin, the woman who had plucked him from a mud hole and set him on the path he deserved. She would be rewarded, granted special access to the coming display of wonder. Even under sedation, she fought, a raging storm within her, far stronger than the others. He propped her up as a lone audience member, prying her eyes open. The others sniveled and sobbed. They were brought on stage to perform their final act. With a contemptible sneer, he slapped makeup onto their faces and shone stage lights upon them. They became his instruments. To the sound of self-prodded melodies, he tortured them, gracefully dashing from one body to another, conducting an operatic crescendo from their wailings. They shouted, whimpered, screamed, cried for their loved ones, cried for their mothers. It was a magnificent outpouring of emotion, of what it meant to be human, and they did it with eyes fixed on Ji-woon. Fraserna drained from the stage until with the toss of his throwing knife, the final human instrument fell silent and the music stopped. Covered in sweat and blood and exhaustion, Ji-woon looked to Yeon-jin and bowed. Curtain call. He had attained perfection. With blade in hand, he made his way to Yeon-jin, prepared to tie up the loose ends before the credits rolled. But as he reached her, the fog. From where he did not know, but it billowed around them, damp, cool, comfortable. He saw the ground stage, hospitals and temples, forests and slaughterhouses, an eternal plain adorned with rusted hooks, sustained by the million eyes that would watch him, run from him, experience him. All he had to do was accept, become an implement of the fog, and most importantly, make them scream. Encore. Ooh, he is from the chapter All Kill, which, yes, please, that is awesome. By the way, I meant to say it and I didn't. The Legion is actually from the chapter Darkest Among Us. I forgot to mention that. And it is important when you're listening to the Survivor videos and the Killer videos to understand the backstories, which is really great. Once you actually read their backstories of each individual person and the characters that come together, it all starts clicking and it's magnificent. Character info, the twins. This is from the Binding of Kin chapter, and this one is a hard character to play. For those of you who don't know, the twins is the sister and the brother who happens to kind of look conjoined almost, but in reality he can actually escape her body, and you as the player get to play as the conjoined twin. Sounds kind of twisted, but it's a lot of fun, so just saying. Alright, backstory. A pair of conjoined twins, Charlotte and Victor Deshays, formed an emotional bond like none other. The unlikeliness of their successful birth in the 17th century could be described as miraculous, yet it immediately brought out their life of persecution. The twins emerged with Victor lower bodies asphyxiated into the chest of his sister, legs twisted around her muscles and organs. He was smaller than Charlotte, grown as if he were an appendage of her body rather than a fully formed boy. As the newborns screeched, so too did the midwife who delivered them, running from the home, yelling of a demon birthed by a witch. So began the hunting of Charlotte, Victor, and their mother, Madeline. The coming years were fleeting memories for the twins, yet they were the closest thing to a normal life they would know. The journey with their mother was what they believed all children underwent, the games of running and hiding through France's countryside being an ordinary occurrence. At the age of 5, a new challenge to the game was presented as their mother fell ill. Pale and exhausted, Madeline had no choice but to pass responsibility of collecting food onto Charlotte. The girl, burdened under extra clothing that concealed Victor's protruding body, set out from their forest tent and marched to the nearby town. Though a peculiar sight, she did what she had been trained for, waiting for an opening at the market, swiping whatever food she could. It was victory in the game, but one short-lived. After midnight, glowing flames surrounded the family's encampment, bobbing through the darkness. A single commanding shout broke the night silence, and a mob of witch hunters streamed in. Grubby hands tore the twins from their bed, Charlotte frantically kicking all who approached. Madeline cried for her children, her voice abruptly silenced by a club to her skull. Victor shrieked, the wailings of a trapped rat. The hunters coordinated quickly. A judge on hand declared Madeline guilty of witchcraft, evidenced by her demon spawn. Within minutes, they shackled her unconscious body to a tree, surrounding her feet with dry twigs and moss. As she awoke, she did not struggle, only begged her children to turn away. They would be given no choice. The twins were forced to watch as the torch was lit, and they watched the flames leap up on their mother's skirt, charring and sizzling her flesh. They watched as fat dripped from her body, and until her face bubbled and twisted. They watched until the screams that tore her vocal cords were no more, and all that was left was a crackling of embers and a nauseating stench. Whatever joy and goodness were in them died with their mother. Caged and transported to an old wood temple, they were sold to a secretive group clad in dark cloaks. Victor reached with the ferocity of a rabid beast at anyone who approached, clawing and biting. The only solace that could calm him was the embrace of his sister, Charlotte, bitter and hateful to all but her brother, found purpose in being his protector. Sorry, I have to move. Within the temple, they were exposed to unusual experiments, for years some cruel, many simply baffling. One day, they would be made to break the neck of a small gray bird. The next, they would bleed their fingers into a vase of roses. Every seventh day, they would sleep with the branch of a damp oak beneath their pillow. There was the chanting, a never-ending chorus from cloaked figures on scheduled intervals. In time, a final experiment was planned. Two robed figures herded the twins to the center of the temple, holding Charlotte upon an altar in a room alit with candelabras. Candelabras? The wrinkled face of a man peered under his hood, placing a hand on the forehead of each twin, making careful examination of their skulls. "Memento mori," he uttered, as he withdrew a shining blade. Charlotte rolled to her side, shifting her brother off the altar. With a screech, he stretched his arm as far as he could, knocking a candelabra to the ground. The flames took to the dry wood immediately. They swept over the floor, igniting the black robes that brushed against it. Screams of agony pierced the chaos, invigorating Charlotte. She dashed through the inferno, vision concealed with nothing but black smoke and blazing flame. A painful heaviness filled her lungs. No exit could be found. Every step leading overwhelming heat. She fell to her knees, suffocating, and then saw it. Sunlight. Trees. She stumbled from the fire to the dewy grass without looking back. She ran into the forest until she collapsed. When Charlotte opened her eyes, she reached for Victor's hand. He made no attempt to budge. His body hung helplessly from her torso. She collapsed. His face stared into his sad, still eyes. The movement she was accustomed to, his body pulling at her skin, his legs prodding at the cavity in her chest, were no more. Victor was dead. Charlotte had no choice but to continue moving as she mourned, fearing black cloaks and witch hunters were prowling. She concealed her brother's corpse under her clothing and marched for the sewers of a nearby city. There she set up a camp, emerging often to steal whatever food she could, resorting to raiding barns for pig slop when desperate set in. Throughout the years, Victor's corpse rotted as his limbs oozed and blackened, yet his body demonstrated resistance to complete decomposition, as if his sister's blood was still coursed through him. Protecting his lifeless body became Charlotte's sole reason for being, refusing to ever be separated from the only family she had left. Life in her teenage years was a game of survival. Her hatred for humanity grew each day under the realization that they would never leave her be. No matter how many died during her botched robberies and desperate attempts to escape, there would always be more to pursue and sling words of condemnation at her. Monster, demon, witch. And it was Black Cloaks who were the worst of them. Their hunt for her was unending, forcing her to constantly abandon shelter and run. For years, Charlotte fled, drawing blood out of the necessity, cradling her long dead brother in the night. During a frigid winter, her body began to break down. Food was scarce, and the refuge of rickety shacks was no use against freezing temperatures. Sickle in hand, she sheltered near her campsite in the woods, not knowing if the Black Cloaks would take her before the cold did. As frost crystallized around her nostrils and her lips took on a gentle blue hue, Charlotte felt something she had never experienced: acceptance. She closed her eyes, opening herself to the serenity of death, when a shriek, shrill and vicious, pierced her ears. Victor spasmed and flailed from her chest, a cloud of fog encompassing him. Before she could react, he spilled from her in a bloody puddle, landing on the snow and running. Pulling herself from the edge of death, she gave chase, calling his name. She ran through the forest until her legs could hardly carry her, until finally, within her view, was Victor, sitting at the edge of a thick fog. His face twisted and feral, screaming as a dark hooded figure emerged from the fog, grabbing his arm and seized him. The serenity that had crept into Charlotte's was extinguished, replaced with seething hatred and rage that she had depended on for so long. With a tight grip on her sickle, she charged into the fog, prepared to eviscerate anyone who set foot near her brother. Creepy. That's how that is. Okay, let's see. We're gonna move on to the Blight. This is from the Descendant Beyond chapter, and this is a hard character apparently, based on difficulty. I've been up against. I've never played as the Blight, but I've been up against people who've played as the Blight, and there are some who try and they fail miserably, and there are those who rise to lower ranks super quickly because you can tell they put so much time and dedication into this character. For me to be able to take a character like that and control that running rage that he gets, or like it's like a fury of some sort, it's intense and it's difficult. So kudos to those who plays the Blight, and we are going to read his backstory, which, by the way, I've never read. I did bring water with me, and I'm gonna take a drink. Sorry. I don't know why I get hoarse so quickly. I did just come off of a 4-hour stream doing nothing but talking the whole time, so that could be it. Backstory. To understand the human condition, one must rise above it. This was the credo of Talbot Grimes, a Scottish... Am I saying that right? Talbot? No, that's it. To understand the human condition, one must rise above it. This was the credo of Talbot Grimes, a Scottish chemist whose unrestrained ambition took him to towering heights. As a boy, he was a popular child, bright, charismatic, and unafraid to challenge authority. Yet despite his social graces, he was fiercely independent, spending much of his time exploring the sprawling fields near his town alone. What began as a child's curiosity nearly turned deadly after experimenting with a patch of poisonous foxglove. For days he laid in bed, dripping with sweat, purging any food that touched his stomach. When he recovered, it wasn't fear that gripped him, but fascination. There was something magical in how a single flower could so drastically affect him. Into his adult years, his ambition developed as quickly as his questionable methods. He attended the London School of Medicine and excelled despite several reprimands. His willingness to push the limits secured him a position with the British East Indian Company. Within several years, he was made head chemist. In time, he completed one of the greatest achievements, a chemical that could increase a worker's productivity while reducing their need for rest. He was rewarded with a secret laboratory beneath a prison camp on Dyer Island. It all tends to come circle back to Dyer Island. There, off the coast of India, prisoners from the Opium War became his unwilling subjects, leading to a drug that allowed soldiers to withstand incredible amounts of pain. Though most side effects were minor, there were rumors that a small number of soldiers went mad. In feral states, they massacred villages, impaling the populace on bayonets, leaving them hanging from trees. There were no official reports on the subject, and Talbot refused to blame himself for what only could be exaggerated war stories. Though his callous brilliance seemed unflappable, he was ignorant to the enemies his questionable work had amassed. Yes, that is it. The realization struck him quite literally with a steel pipe to the back of his head during a trip to Mangalore. He was bound and loaded into a wagon. When his blindfold was removed, a sickly man showed him a mass grave filled with hundreds of bodies. Unbeknownst to Talbot, his productivity increasing drug had killed nearly entire factories worth of workers. He knew he couldn't defend himself against the anger and accusations of his abductor. All he could do was curl up as the blows from the steel pipe rained down. His body was thrown into the grave and left for dead. Shifting between consciousness and the darkest black, he crawled for an escape, fingers sinking into the rotting flesh. Black flies feasted on his uncovered skin. The sensation of 100 pin pricks stabbing into him. As he collapsed, he came face to face with a dead woman's dazzling hazel eyes. Too weak to pull away, he could do nothing but witness his life's work. Then, from the edge of death, he was brought back. He found himself on a small bed as a kindly wrinkled face looked over him. With each pained breath, he was nursed back to health in an ancient mystery school posing as a monastery. In verdant gardens behind tall, unassuming walls, monks studied forbidden texts, striving to expand the human mind in the search for other dimensions, believing one would be connected to the other. Talbot's knowledge proved indispensable. His mind-altering chemicals integrating seamlessly with theories of neutral expansion. He realized then that his salvation was no coincidence. He was plucked from the pit specifically to advance the school's knowledge. He agreed to help until his recovery was complete, being tasked with researching what the monks called the soul chemical, a compound delivered from the pineal gland that could open the mind's eyes. What began as a favor to his saviors soon became an obsession. Poring over the school's archives of lost texts, he uncovered scientific formulas that confirmed previously unthinkable ideas. He dreamt of ushering humankind into a new period of enlightenment. Yep. Perhaps then nightmares of the hundreds of dead factory workers and those two hazel eyes would fade from his mind. As he came closer to a breakthrough, the demeanor of the monks shifted. The gentle smiles they offered were paired with uneasy eyes that quickly darted away when spotted. The polite conversations he was once privy to turned to hushed murmurs. The last thing he would see of the school was a cracked ceiling above his head, branching like dendrite through the plaster. His next memories were shattered mosaic of images and sensations, smearing lights, horse hoofs on cobblestone, coarse burlap scratching at his cheeks, and sharp bites into his arm. He awoke ragged and unwashed, splayed on the straw mattress of an opium den. Mind in a dense fog, his first thought was of his notes. He only recorded of his groundbreaking revelations. He searched frantically, scrambling through the dingy basement, pleading aloud for help. The few other Denzians looked up from their hammocks, offering nothing but drug-soaked eyes and apathetic gazes that soon fell onto half slumber. Before he noticed the robbed figure appearing behind him, a needle plunged into his arm and he would disappear once more. Awoken again each time, hazier than the last, he tongued at the hollow gasp between his teeth. How long he worked. A faint memory returned. The soul chemical, his notes, the verge of a breakthrough, the faraway whisper entered his mind. He fumbled with the stone, sharpening it with shaking hands. In the dim light on the den amongst the catatonic occupants, he carved his research from memory into the walls. He wrote 4 hours until his fingers bled, moving to the floor, taking in everything the voice whispered despite his inability to comprehend it. When there was nowhere left to write, he gripped the stone and carved the message into his chest. Stained with blood, he witnessed a miracle appear before him. a magnificent field of lush orange flowers. The whispering voice beckoned to him, urging him to enter the field and discover worlds and dimensions beyond human comprehension. For a moment, Talbot felt the sense of wonder he possessed as a child. The denizens of Opium Den awoke to silence, the dry scent of smoke still lingering in the air. Shambling out of their drug-hazed fog, they found the stone floor wet with blood, tiny rivulets coursing through the cracks. As eyes adjusted to the darkened room, the jagged lettering scrawled along it beneath it to appear. Written over and over, without end, there was but one single line. Death is only the beginning. Dang. That brings like a whole new light to the actual fog as well, because you notice most of the people who end up getting taken by the entity into the fog and into this other dimension have died or on the brink of death. So to me, that's just kind of cool to think about, because maybe for them it would have been death, but if it wasn't for this other dimension, they've been given a second chance per se to do what they do. All right, so the Executioner for tonight is going to be my last read, and this is from the Silent Hill chapter, difficulty intermediate, and this is the backstory. Let's look at my water here. Oof, yes. Okay, backstory on the Executioner. The sadistic and merciless executioner, Pyramid, is fixated on dispensing punishment through pain. Encumbered by the steel frame upon his head, and with a hulking great blade in tow, he stalked the hellish corridors of Silent Hill, committed to a duty that no one truly understood. Where he trod, even the monsters fled for the shadows, and those who crossed his path fell victim to unrestrained acts of aggression. When his duty was complete and his presence no longer needed, he prepared for the long rest, and yet his skills were required elsewhere. The fog that streamed over him was somehow different than he was accustomed to in Silent Hill, as if each wisp contained the nerves of a creature writhing, seeking him out. There was an unspoken agreement in that moment. The billowing cloud was an invitation to duty and the sadism, and Pyramid Head, stepping into the fog, accepted his obligation once more. So for Pyramid Head, it just seems like he kind of blindly does aggression. Like that's like his duty. He just kills. I mean, he is the executioner, so that makes sense. He's one of the ones that you notice. He does leave that trail that if you walk over it, you get hurt. And he has that huge sword. It's just crazy. I feel bad that he has to carry it around. I mean, seems like it would be heavy. Okay, let's do one more. One more. Deathslinger. Okay, yes, one more. This is good. Okay, so this is from the Chains of Hate chapter, and the difficulty is also intermediate. Last one, I promise. So, backstory. Born in the dust-ridden badlands of American Midwest, Caleb Quinn was son to struggling Irish immigrants. On the edge of the frontier, sickness, famine, and death were common sights, and pioneers contended for whatever scraps they could claim while tycoons feasted. Caleb's father, once an engineer, had few options to ply his trade as businesses posted a common sign, "No Irish need apply." His acquainted tools laid untouched for years until Caleb uncovered them. Noticing his son's interest in the trade, he gifted him his old wrench. That's actually true, and I just want to throw this little tidbit of history in there. A lot of people don't realize that back in the day, the Irish were actually used as slaves as well, and they were also treated extremely harshly by peers that were, I guess you couldn't say peers, but by others who were not Irish. So the Irish people were looked down upon, which I feel is awful for any race to have to go through. But yeah, anywho, moving on. I always thought that was crazy because I never really knew that, and a couple years ago I read into it and I was like, whoa, I had no idea. Alright, so the devices Caleb made under his father's guidance had quaint applications, but when his father was away, they took a grim turn. He hid plans for a mask that would gouge barbed needles into human eyes and rip them from their sockets, complete with sketches of fitted on boys who bullied him. Oof. Yikes. With age, Caleb's engineering abilities became marketable, and employers put their discrimination aside. Henry Bayshore, the owner of United West Rail, hired him. Caleb first invented a gun that shot railroad spikes into the ground. Next, he made a steam-powered tunneling drill. But as Bayshore feigned indifference, the device began turning up at other companies. The patent stolen from Caleb and sold. A familiar sensation coursed through Caleb's blood, feeding the sharp pain in his heart. Rage overwhelming him, he burst into Bayshore's office and smashed his face into a bloody stew. As he was pulled away, he pushed his specialized gun to his boss's gut and squeezed the trigger. A railroad spike plowed through the skin and viscera, nailing Bayshore to his desk. Ooh. Yikes. Imagine all the people trying to hold him back and stuff. The only thing that saved Caleb from hanging was Bayshore's unlikely survival. For 15 years, Caleb was confined to Hellshire Penitentiary, the nation's first private prison. In a fortress of illiterate convicts, he found an unlikely friend in the education prison warden. He designed torture devices for him. Oh, dang. He designed torture devices for him and in return received extra meals. After time, the warden offered to commute his sentence. He spoke of something greater than monetary wealth, political capital, and that his connections could have Bayshore framed and rotting behind bars for a life. He had only one request: make him rich. Fill the prison, use ingenuity to bring outlaws in alive. Caleb returned to his workshop. With a few modifications, emerged with something new: the spear gun. The first trial occurred when a thief robbed a Chinese laundry. Seizing the opportunity, Caleb unleashed his prototype. Metal joints screeched as the spike shot forward, gouging into the target's abdomen. But as the spear tugged, it caught the thief's intestines and with an ungodly sound, yanked them onto the dusty road. After several interactions, the disembowelments dwindled, but Caleb had already earned his new nickname, the Death Slinger. Looking to protect his asset, the prison warden pulled strings and released the Irish inmate to form Caleb's posse. The Hellshire Gang was born. For 6 years, they roamed the country collecting wanted outlaws for the prison, fulfilling their end of the bargain. After a bloody battle at Glenvale, Caleb caught notice of a newspaper headline: Henry Bayshore purchases Hellshire Penitentiary. Oh, dang. In the picture, a disfigured Bayshore proudly shook the warden's hand. Caleb's heart pounded with rage, blood swelling as if it could burst from his veins. He'd been sold out, a pawn in a rich man's game. The Hellshire Gang pledged their loyalty to Caleb and called for the warden's head. In a thundering gallop, they smashed through the prison entrance, shrieking like bloodthirsty murderers. A guard raised his pistol, but hesitated. A spear punctured his chest. Caleb grabbed the man's head and slammed it against the prison cell until it spilled through the bars. Reaching the warden's office, Caleb kicked the door and was met with Reaching the warden's office, Caleb kicked the door and was met with a fortunate sight. It wasn't only the prison warden who cowered in a corner, but Henry Bayshore. Overpowered with rage, Caleb rushed to Bayshore, beating, bludgeoning, tearing at his flesh. The man's blood dripped from his face, crimsoning pool at his feet. The Hellshire Gang swarmed the warden, snapping bones with each kick. With the two men broken and begging for death, the posse dragged them to the commons, where they were left to the growing crowd of prisoners. Dang. Whoa. Soaked in blood and sweat, Caleb hobbled to his old cell, hardly paying notice to Bayshore's screams. He sat on the bed, at the bed's edge, as drops of blood ran from his fingertips. A thick, unnatural fog streamed through the barred window. He pulled out his old wrench, cracked and rusted, and ran a thumb along the metal, regarding it with faded eyes. He couldn't remember when it came to his possession. He didn't care to remember. At his feet he saw a dusty path, and at its end a silhouette of all who had done him wrong: the boys who bullied him, the executives who took advantage of him, and again, Henry Bayshore. Emerging from a fog were the tools to dispose of them, unforgiving steel hooks, brilliant and beautiful in their simplicity. Pain tore through his leg as he stood, but he endured, pushing onward, walking the dusty path, leaving a trail of blood flowing behind him. Never read his story before, and I like it. Super gruesome, super gross, but that's pretty cool. He got revenge. Revenge is never, or should never be, the death of somebody else. I always think that's extremely grotesque. It's easier to better yourself and rise above. But for the narrative of the game, this was actually a really good read. So, a lot of you who don't know, the killers, their readings are going to be a bit on the gruesome side, and I apologize for that. But they are the killers of the game. So, I'll do a warning before we start the next video, just because some of it can be a bit much. I'll make sure I put in the description of this one that there is some descriptions and situations that are a little bit much. But yeah, this was really nice. I learned a lot about a few of the characters, and it's getting a lot easier to learn the backstories of these characters and kind of connect everything together. I think it's really great that they bring these characters that we all know and love from different horror films into this game, because that also gives it a really different kind of edge, and it also kind of brings the whole fog part of it to life, and the entities and why people are being brought to kill or brought in to survive. It seems like a lot of the survivors have been through a lot in their life, and they really show grit and they really show determination to survive and to persevere. That part I love. And the killers, it seems like their main MO is revenge, which mix those two together and it's quite the fight. So if you've ever played this game before, let me know in the comments your thoughts if you like it. If you don't, I'm sorry. I absolutely love the game. I think it's great. I have a blast over on my live streams with my friends, and it's just a lot of fun. Also, the perks and everything that come with the different people is really great, because they also kind of coincide with the killers and with the survivors and what it means. So, and a lot of times when I'm reading, you'll notice that the perks, there are those words that are the perks kind of into the story, and you kind of get a sense of why they have these perks attached to them, which I think is also really, really great. So again, thank you guys for stopping by. I really do appreciate it. Don't forget to check for an upload tomorrow. I'll be reading some more killers. I'm not sure how many are left. This may be a 3-series part, just like the survivors were. But again, thank you for coming and hanging out with me. My name is Christy, and I appreciate your time. You can go find me on my Facebook Live if you ever want to see me actually play this game over on Facebook. I am Mama Lee over there, so don't forget to check me out. Again, thank you for coming in. Thank you for hanging out with me. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you all very, very soon. Bye.